So we know that the demand curve is downward sloping. We know that higher price, lower quantity demanded, lower price, higher quantity demanded, holding all else constant. So that's obviously very useful to know. You want to know if you lower your price, well, yeah, you're going to sell more. And if you raise your price, you're going to sell less. That is the law of demand. We pretty much assume that's going to happen. And we've talked about where the demand curve comes from and everything. But it's also really important, and it matters a lot, not just knowing that the demand curve is downward sloping, not just knowing that price and quantity demanded move in opposite directions, but how responsive quantity demanded is to a change in price. And that's where this concept of elasticity comes in. Elasticity is really one of the fundamentally most important concepts in microeconomics, and one of the things that economists often get paid money to estimate for firms. Because it's one thing to know, yes, if I lower my price, I'm going to sell more, but how much more? If I raise my price, I'm going to sell less, but how much less? Because that really matters. If you raise your price and you sell a lot less, maybe you don't want to do it. But if you raise your price and you get that higher price and your quantity demanded doesn't fall very much, maybe it's worth it. And that's what elasticity tells you. So that's why elasticity is so important. So anytime you hear the word elasticity in economics, you can think responsiveness. And so there are a bunch. You can talk about the elasticity of supply or the income elasticity. There's a lot of elasticities. Elasticity is just the responsiveness of one variable to a change in the other. How does this variable change when this variable changes? But what we're going to focus on, and really the most important and most valuable elasticity for firms to know is, and for policymakers to know also, because you want to know if you tax sugary beverages to get people to consume less. If you raise the price of the beverage, are people going to consume a lot less and you have a big success in reducing consumption? Or if you raise the price, are people just going to pay the higher price and keep drinking and only have a small decrease in consumption? So it's not just for firms, but for policymakers, for a lot of people, it's important to really understand not just that the demand curve is downward sloping, but how responsive quantity demanded is to a change in price, how big that drop in quantity when we raise our prices, or how big that increase in quantity when we lower our prices. So if we, for example, here in this situation, these two graphs are identical. So at point A, the price is $10, the quantity demanded is 500, the quantity being sold is 500, and then the firm is thinking, let's raise our price to $12. At point A, the total revenue, price times quantity, the total amount of money they're taking in. Okay, remember, total revenue is just the amount of money they're taking in, not taking into account costs. It's just flat out the amount of money you're bringing in. So the total revenue, price times quantity, $10 a unit times 500 units, we're making $5,000 in revenue. Now I raise my price to $12. What's going to happen to my total revenue? Well, it depends, doesn't it? It depends. I raise my price. I know quantity demanded is going to fall because I know the law of demand. So I know quantity demand is going to fall, but how much? So is it the case that quantity demand is going to fall to 300? And so my demand curve looks something like this. Call that point B. Or is it the case that my quantity demanded only falls to 450? And so my demand curve actually looks more like, oops, something like that. That's really important to know, because that color's not showing up very well, is it? There we go. 450. Because, and call that point C. Let's look at the total revenue. So in both cases, we were at point A, we were making $5,000 in total revenue. In both cases, we raised our price from $10 to $12. The only difference is how much quantity demanded fell when we raised our price. And so we can see at point B, the price has gone up to $12 and the quantity's fallen to 300. So our total revenue has actually gone down even though our price is higher. On the other hand, over here in this graph, we can see total revenue at point C. Same thing, we raised our price to $12 and quantity fell, law of demand, higher price, lower quantity demanded. But instead of quantity falling to 300, quantity only fell from 500 down to 450. And 12 times 450 is $5,400. It matters a lot how responsive quantity demanded is. It matters when I raise my price those $2, how much does my quantity fall? In both cases, I gained revenue because I raised my price by $2. And in both cases, I lost revenue because I dropped my quantity. That's always going to happen. That's the law of demand. You raise your price, you're going to have a higher revenue due to the higher price that you're charging on the units that you're still selling, but you're going to have a lower revenue due to the lower quantity. And so what elasticity tells us is how big the change in price is relative to the change in quantity. And so it tells us whether the plus area is going to be bigger or smaller than the minus area. Is what we gain by raising price more than enough to offset what we lost by decreasing quantity? And what determines that, right, is how responsive quantity demanded is to that change in price. The responsiveness, in this case, price went up by $2, but we stopped selling 200 units. 200 units that we could have sold for $10 each. So we lost $2,000. Decrease in quantity led to total revenue decreasing by $2,000. Whereas over here, we lost decrease in quantity led to total revenue decreasing by 50 units times $10, or just $500. In both cases, quantity fell, but it fell a lot more here. And then in both cases, price went up, and so the increase in price made our total revenue go up. We're selling each unit for $2 more. $2 more on those 300 units, $2 times 300, $600. Whereas here, the fact that we're charging a higher price, our total revenue is going to go up by $2 per unit, but on 450 units, because quantity didn't fall nearly as much here. So we're charging a higher price here, but we're only getting that on the 300 units we're still selling. We're charging a higher price here, and we're getting it on 450 units. So our total revenue went up by $900. And so we can see net change in total revenue. Over here, the decrease in quantity made revenue fall by $2,000. The increase in price only increased our revenue by $600, and so our net change in revenue, we lost $1,400 from $5,000 down to $3,600. Over here, our revenue went down because we were selling less, and it went up because our price was higher. But what we gained from a higher price was way more, or significantly more, than what we lost from the lower quantity, and so our net change in total revenue was, we lost $500 and we gained $900. So our net change in total revenue was positive $400, because that was. So there's a lot of numbers there and stuff, and graphs, but I want you to take a second and just think about it conceptually. Because if you think about it conceptually, I promise you it'll make sense. You raise your price. Does that mean you make more money? It depends. It depends on how much less you sell. We know when you raise your price, your quantity is going to fall. What elasticity tells you is how much less you're going to sell. What elasticity tells you is, yeah, you're going to charge a higher price. So your revenue will go up because of the higher price, but it will go down because of the lower quantity. What elasticity tells you is which of those effects is bigger, how big that change in quantity is relative to the change in price. And it would be true for a price drop also. When you drop your price, you lose money because your price is lower on every unit, but you sell more. So when you drop your price, your revenue goes up because you're selling more, but goes down because you're charging a lower price. And so in every case, let me erase this up here and I'll leave that down there. Total revenue equals price times quantity. In every case, a higher price leads to a lower quantity demanded, or a lower price leads to a higher quantity demanded. That's just the law of demand. But so whenever you change your price, there's going to be these counteracting forces operating on total revenue. Price will be going up and quantity will be going down, or price will be going down and quantity will be going up. What elasticity tells you is which of these is relatively larger. So elasticity can then tell you, if you change your price, what is going to happen to your total revenue, because it tells you how big your change in quantity is relative to your change in price. And that's why it's so important.